Gang, your boy just dropped a limited edition Spooktober t-shirt. I'm only selling 150 of these on a Yeezy ting, so if you want one, head on over to traplaw.com ASAP, hit that link in description or the merch shelf below. Cheers! DJ Vlad is a divisive voice in the hip-hop scene. Of course, he's the founder of Vlad TV, and while the uninitiated might think that that's just a Russian-language hip-hop news site, the truth is that over the last decade and a bit, Vlad TV has become the premier source of interviews with rappers, cappers, and cap busters. Anyone that's anyone has had a DJ Vlad interview, whether it's a celebrity or a kingpin in the criminal underworld. And over the years, DJ Vlad has been fighting the good fight, disseminating information, news, and knowledge, and documenting anything of significance that relates to the rap culture for us and future generations to look back on and understand what was really going on in these streets. But naturally, this culture soldier hasn't always been viewed favorably by the hip-hop community. He's been dissed endlessly by rappers and fellow rap commentators for being the police or a snitch, with the main critique being that Vlad's interviews might lead artists who previously lived a life of crime to incriminate themselves on camera. Now, I personally don't buy that argument, and neither does Vlad. Over the years, he's vehemently denied allegations of snitching, making it very clear to his critics that he doesn't tend to ask people about open cases and his goal is not to incriminate people. Reiterating for all to see that what he really does is provide a big-ass platform for anyone from any background with an interesting story to tell to get their message out there and allow them to publicly reap the benefits and publicity of those stories existing on DJ Vlad's channel, for good or for bad. But as famous rice magnate Uncle Ben always said, with great power comes great responsibility. Because of course there is always a danger with this territory that somebody might not like something that they saw said on Vlad TV. And today's story is one of those instances. And in this case, the man who Vlad upset was none other than the boss, Rick Ross. The other Rick, the fake Rick Ross. Rick Ross, the biggest boss the rap game has ever weighed. After bursting out the gate in 2006 with his hit song Hustlin', all about his daily routine of repeatedly selling bricks, and of course a song where he famously claimed to know Pablo Escobar, despite Escobar having been killed when Rick Ross was 17. Oh, and he also claimed to know Manuel Noriega, who by the time Rick Ross was old enough to buy a beer, was serving a 40-year jail sentence. Of course, it was obvious to anybody with half a brain that Rick Ross's big-time drug dealer persona was built on shaky ground from the start. But of course, after Hustlin', Rose's Scarface sampling anthem Push It only further pushed the mythos that Rick Ross was truly a big fat drug boss moving big fat bricks. However, once Rick Ross the rapper begun to pick up steam, eventually the real Freeway Ricky Ross, the actual drug dealer who the rapper Rick Ross based his persona on, crawled out the woodwork to cast yet more doubt on Rick Ross the rapper's boastful raps about being a drug kingpin. Now again, anybody with a double-digit IQ could have worked out that Rick Ross the rapper's persona was all theatre even back then. And to the people that genuinely enjoyed his music, it really didn't matter that he wasn't really out there selling bricks or that he didn't really know Pablo Escobar personally. In fact, it seemed like the one person who was most upset about finding out that Rick Ross wasn't really a big-time drug dealer was Rick Ross himself, who following these revelations came across incredibly insecure about his fake persona being exposed. But simple stage name comparisons were merely a drop in the ocean compared to what was revealed in 2008, truly bringing Rick Ross's worst nightmare to fruition. Because sure, fans can stomach the fact that the only thing Rick Ross ever ordered by the kilo was lemon pepper wings, but finding out their favourite drug dealer kingpin rapper once also worked for law enforcement? Well, that wouldn't slide. And ultimately this story would become the wing that broke the whale's back, because Rick Ross was exposed in a big way by the Smoking Gun, the same gang of prehistoric rap law exposers who also put Akon on blast for having not really been locked up for a 3-year stretch. Now, the actual Smoking Gun in Rick Ross's case was a simple picture, an image depicting a young Rick Ross seemingly graduating at a Department of Corrections ceremony, with the obvious implication of this being that Rick Ross, far from a big drug dealer kingpin, was in a former life actually a CO. Yes, a CO, a corrections officer, aka prison guard. It seemed like in a heartbeat, Rose went from slanging OZs to guest starring on HBO's OZ. For the record, this happened, there is no denying it. Yes, people, before Rick Ross was a CEO, he was a CO. Before it was Bel Air Rose, it was locking those gates. And before it was brushing your teeth after running to Wingstop, it was running to G-Wing to stop a toothbrush shanking. I know that one was a reach, but come on. Now for the record, I've read Rick Ross's very good autobiography, Hurricanes, where he discusses in depth his experience being a CO. He explains why he did it, having been left with no other options at the time after his street crew fell apart. And hey, when you need wing money, a man will do whatever it takes. I genuinely don't think that it's something Rick Ross should be ashamed of. But unfortunately, Rick Ross didn't seem to feel the same way in 2008. Because to me, what made this story so damning wasn't necessarily just Rick Ross's loss of street cred, but it was all of his attempts to barefaced lie when confronted with mountains of evidence. After these images surfaced, Rick Ross appeared in numerous interviews, completely denying the cold hard facts.
Trick Daddy recently accused you of working as a prison guard at one point, Rick. Is there any truth to that?
No, that's not true. That's crazy. It's not true, man, but, you know, dog a sucker, and he mad that, you know, I done came out of nowhere and just, you know, took over the streets like that, you know what I mean?
You were not a correctional officer.
No, don't believe the hype.
Being this was 2008, Rick Ross initially went in using the R. Kelly defense, aka the Shaggy defense, aka it wasn't me, with Ross later elaborating that he thought that it was hackers that had put his head on someone else's fat, disgusting body. I added that last bit myself. Well, the problem here is when it comes to the smoking gun, where there's smoke, there is fire. And these guys know how to get you. So, following a wave of denials from Rick Ross and his camp, the smoking gun proceeded to release another article titled Screw Rick Ross, taking their investigation to the next level and providing supporting documents, including the discovery of Rick Ross's social security number, matching that to the same William Roberts who graduated from that Department of Corrections Training Academy. Hell, they even got their hands on his 1995 to 1997 CO salary, showing his earnings ranging from $22,000 to $25,000 over that period. Not very rich forever, is it? And hell, they didn't stop there, because as Ross continued to deny these damning allegations, the smoking gun continued making Freedom of Information requests, eventually getting their hands on an 86-page personnel file. This Rick Ross-sized haul of documents proved unequivocally that Rick Ross had indeed been a CO, and they even had his goddarn employment application from when he applied for the job in the first place. They even found the personal history form where he'd named his mother and sister as personal references, and they matched those names of his mom and sis to the thank yous that he gave in the liner notes of his 2008 album, Triller. They did a background check and proved that Rick Ross has 0 convictions, and hell, it even turned out that whilst working as a CO, he had a perfect attendance record. Not only was he out here being a CO, he was a damn good CO too. Hell, he was the most well-behaved CO in the game, baby. Boss! In some ways, you could even say he was the Rick Ross of COs. Ain't no better COs than Rick Ross. Well, after all of this, you could sure imagine that Rick Ross's face was sure red. And let's not forget that at the time, this was such popping news in the hip-hoposphere that every single rap news blog and website was of course reporting on it. And hell, at a certain point, this became such a big story that it began to infiltrate other interviews with different rappers. Publications began turning to numerous other rappers and supposed career tough guys, as well as the fans, to get their thoughts on Rick Ross's CO past and find out whether or not it would change people's perception of him.
Do you have any problem with Rick Ross being an ex-corrections officer? Is that not enough, like, gangster for you?
You know what? Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. COs are not police officers. Let me tell you that.
Now, for the record, one MTV article appeared with statements where other rappers gave their opinion on Rick Ross's CO revelations, including the likes of Ludacris and fellow smoking gun exposee Akon, who very sensibly suggested that Rick Ross just brush the whole thing off like a bit of dirt on Jay-Z's shoulder. However, unfortunately, Rick Ross didn't seem to follow this advice. I imagine all of that insecurity built up in his already insecure mind and eventually tipped over into a rage. I mean, just imagine, everyone in the game was talking about his street cred, whether or not he would still have a career after this, and I'm sure it felt like, at least for a brief moment, that his entire house of cards was about to fall. And so at a certain point, it seemed like Rick Ross was looking at an opportunity to get back at any of the people who were relentlessly clowning him and his situation. And perhaps maybe this was even an opportunity for him to reclaim some of that street cred that he had duly lost. And the opportunity to get that get back quickly emerged in the form of emerging rap news website and budding YouTube channel, Vlad TV. Obviously, DJ Vlad had reported on the CO rumors surrounding Rick Ross, just like anybody else at the time, and story has it, much like MTV was, DJ Vlad was out here interviewing other rappers and asking them their opinions on the Rick Ross CO scandal. And a lot of old articles from around the time this happened seem to mention that Rick Ross was particularly upset that DJ Vlad had asked the Clips their opinion on Ross's CO rumors. Now, we saw that their opinions on Ross weren't particularly spicy from this old hip hop DX article, where Malice and Pusha T from the Clips gave their opinions on the situation, ultimately saying that Ross should have never lied about being a CO in the first place, but ultimately not saying much. So back in 2008, it seemed like Vlad did a 3-part interview with the clips. Funnily enough, published only a week before this altercation took place, and while today parts 1 and 3 are easily found, part 2 is notably hard to find by comparison, and I would wager that it was scrubbed from the internet as a result of this beef. And I would probably also wager that somewhere in that interview there was a mention of Rick Ross being a CO that probably rubbed Rick Ross up the wrong way. In fact, in the MTV article covering the fight between Ross and Vlad after it happened, that also mentioned an earlier Vlad TV interview where the clips had mentioned Ross. In fact, that MTV article went further to point out that it was this interview with the clips that Vlad had seemed to have linked to another interview with the real freeway Ricky Ross, most likely promoting the narrative that the rap Rick Ross stole his persona and stage name from the real-life drug dealer Rick Ross. There's a lot of Rick Rosses, I know. Most likely promoting the narrative that Rick Ross the rapper stole his entire persona from the real-life drug dealer Rick Ross. A story which I've covered very extensively elsewhere on the channel, link in description, and no Rick Ross, I will not meet with you. Around a week after that Clips interview was published, on August the 8th, the 2008 Ozone Magazine Awards took place in Houston, Texas. Rick Ross was there performing on stage with T-Pain, Ace Hood and DJ Khaled, wearing a very large Deeper Than Rap t-shirt or a very small Deeper Than Rap bedspread with head and armholes cut into it. According to MTV News, DJ Vlad says that Rick Ross actually reached out to him first, sending him a text out the blue saying "You gon' learn," followed by an extended rendition of his album title, Triller. Well, apparently Vlad didn't know who the hell this message was even from, and after inquiring with a who dis, he got a reply, with Rick Ross confirming that it was him getting in touch saying he's hearing things. Not long after this, Ross called Vlad to say that he'd been hearing things about him on his website, that they were going to make a story together, and suggesting that they were going to meet up. Once they had both worked out that they were in town together for the Ozone Awards, Vlad and Ross arranged a meeting spot on the 2nd floor of the Houston Hilton. Ross came along with 4 other people, Vlad came alone. They had a very brief conversation where Rick Ross supposedly said, "We got beef," and apparently angered by both not getting the wings he ordered and DJ Vlad's earlier posting of content seemingly celebrating Ross's downfall, it quickly became clear that Ross had Vlad cornered in the Houston Hilton for one reason only: to administer a 5-piece combo of lemon pepper fists. Ross's boys proceeded to surround Vlad whilst they were still talking, eventually sucker punching him and going on to administer a beatdown so bad Vlad was left on the ground bleeding profusely. The men quickly fled the scene, with apparently one shouting, "Yeah, motherfucker, that's what you get." Vlad was apparently left with a cut that required 7 stitches below one of his eyes, 3 facial fractures, a corneal abrasion, and possible nerve damage. And to make matters worse, soon after, images emerged showing Vlad in public with a very bruised face. But the disrespect didn't stop there. During a subsequent interview with DJ Envy, Rick Ross continued to clown Vlad about the incident, boasting to Funk Flex about Vlad apparently needing 400 stitches.
It was just some guy got his head bust severely. Guess he thought it was a bright idea. It wasn't. I think the guy needed 400 stitches or something.
So it was unfortunate what happened.
Of course. I wouldn't wish that on Tony, the old man Yayo.
And elsewhere, Ross was being interviewed by DJ Envy, boasting to him that he'd given Vlad a $20 million beating.
It was an unfortunate situation. He was somewhere and he got his head bust. And yeah, they said it was like wide or something. I couldn't believe it. They showed me pictures. I was like, oh my God.
Oh man.
Wow. You know what I mean? Why would someone do this? You feel me? I saw a picture. I'm like, what is this? And they like, this is the guy. I'm like, wow.
Like something like Facing the Death or something.
Like he should have sued for 20 million. Wow. That was a 20 million head bust.
Look, I know it's not very nice, but $20 million beating, that's a real flex. That's basically what Logan Paul is about to get. However, keeping things classy, in response, Vlad took a much more positive tone when he was interviewed by Angela Yee for Lip Service, saying that he couldn't speak on the incident specifically at the time, but saying that he went back to work within hours of the beatdown happening.
They called you in the room, there was a little scuffle. Well, basically, they kind of jumped you. And then the pictures online, you were very bruised up, and you got, like, your eye was real fucked up. You look fine now, though.
How could you not be mad about that?
We keep it moving. We keep moving. We keep working. You know, I was back to work.
You were.
Within a few hours, actually.
Within a week of the Wingstop whooping, as it will now be known as, on August the 15th, 2008, DJ Vlad filed a whopping $4 million lawsuit against Rick Ross. The suit claimed that Ross had orchestrated a brutal attack on Vlad, carried out at Ross's direction by his accomplices, all in retribution for Vlad's media coverage of Ross's past life as a corrections officer. I mean, it's funny even looking back and reading some of those things that were in the lawsuit, because this is some real Streisand effect stuff, which, if you're not familiar, is the idea that when celebrities try to hide info with lawsuits, they usually only cause more people to discover that information that they were trying to hide. This idea being made famous by an incident where Barbara Streisand was trying to stop people seeing pictures of her house on the internet. This house. Get a good look. So the same thing kind of happened to Rick Ross in an effort to beat and intimidate Vlad into not covering his potentially fabricated past. Rick Ross had inadvertently getting that embarrassing fabricated past put on record. Because even in the very lawsuit against Rick Ross, Vlad is prodding Ross's past as a CEO, saying specifically the attack was launched by Ross in an attempt to stifle Vlad's journalistic reporting and freedom of expression. Perhaps further fanning the flames, it portrays Ross as somebody who has painstakingly created his public persona to be that of a major drug dealer and gangster, but is in reality a former correctional officer. And Vlad is literally trolling Rick Ross in the court documents here. That is a lovely salting of a lemon pepper lawsuit from Vlad. I mean, just think about it. All Ross wanted was for everybody to stop talking about that picture of him as a CEO. This one, take a good look at it. Rick Ross got so angry at this picture, he took all of his boys to the Houston Hilton to beat up Vlad. All because of this one picture. I mean, what a boss. He's such a boss. He's such a boss. Big Ricky Rose, the boss. It's embarrassing. Anyway, after a long period of back and forthing, the lawsuit was settled in DJ Vlad's favor with a modest settlement of $300,000. And only $50,000 of that went into Vlad's pocket as compensation. With the remaining $250,000 being punitive damages, Ross was ordered to pay by the court as punishment for what he did.
Okay, so I realized after I recorded this just why Vlad's settlement was so much lower than the $4 million he was asking for. Remember that interview where he told Angela Yee that he went back to work the next day after the beating?
We keep it moving. We keep moving. We keep working. You know, I was back to work.
You were.
Within a few hours, actually.
Well, in Vlad's recent interview with Charlemagne, he actually revealed that this interview was used against him in court.
I've had cases that were affected based on interviews I've done with Angela Yee. You know what I mean? It was played in court. Mm-hmm. So I learned the hard way to shut the fuck up.
I'm guessing this probably led the court to think that his supposedly awful injuries probably weren't quite bad enough to warrant a $4 million bag if he went to work the next day. And I'm sure many people can appreciate the irony of Vlad incriminating himself in an interview for once.
Rick Ross responded to the verdict thanking his attorney, seemingly taking the $300,000 settlement down from $4 million initially as a big W, even though in that statement he said he planned to appeal the decision, which didn't seem to have happened. Meanwhile, over on Vlad's side, he was finally free to speak on the situation, addressing it after claiming the W in court, saying, "As an individual that covers breaking news in the hip-hop world, I am grateful that the jury punished Rick Ross for setting me up, when all I was doing was covering the news and making commentary. Hey look, it's a W. It's no $4 million, but it's a W, and that's what's important here." And this is particularly important to me, because you know what Vlad was doing? He was standing up. Standing up to rappers, fakers, haters, and CEOs everywhere, and saying you can't intimidate people for telling the truth and sharing news that you don't like. Because as somebody that loves nothing more than clowning rappers and speaking cold hard facts, this is something that deserves to be stood up for. Because rappers can't just fight every single negative bit of press that they get. Because if they did, Anthony Fantano would be nothing more than a pile of bloody bones and organs by the end of the week. And do you really want that? Since this incident, Vlad has remained pretty tight-lipped about what went down or any of the surrounding events. But he has increased his security budget, famously telling Adam 22 now that if you pull a gun on him in an interview, you're getting shot in the head.
Yeah, man, you pull a gun on me in an interview, you're gonna get shot in the head.
Fair play. In contrast, however, the effects of this incident echoed throughout Rick Ross's career for the next few years. Eventually, he was forced to publicly acknowledge that that was indeed him in the photo, going on to do various interviews saying that yes, he took that CEO job, but as part of some sort of gangster operation.
At all, so I just wanted to put it in perspective, respect my homies that's involved, you understand? And when certain things come up, Ross don't address that. And that's what I'm gonna respect, you know what I mean?
Is that picture Rick Ross?
Yeah, that picture was Rick Ross. That was me in the photos.
Okay.
Most definitely.
Is there an explanation?
Most definitely, and the reason, you know, when rumors surface I felt like me going to a radio station giving a yes or no answer wouldn't be a clear depiction of the situation.
Yeah, sure, Ross. You were part of a team. I've seen Prison Break. I know those tattoos all over your titties were just blueprints. But as far as how Rose felt about his payout to Vlad, once again, even losing the lawsuit, he continued to clown Vlad in media appearances.
Ricky Ross, and I'm sitting here with DJ Greg Vlad. He trying to set me up. He want me to be a defendant, but it won't work. They was trying to hit the boy for 4 of them big ones. It ain't work though. That defense. I had to fight the power.
1,000? I'm talking about this fight didn't even last a round.
No. And I ain't even fight. I ain't fight.
And in the years that followed, Rose even went on to diss Vlad on wax, including telling people to do the new dance move the DJ Vlad on the outro of his remix to John Legend's track Green Light.
Yeah, we finna do a new dance. It's called the DJ Vlad. The DJ Vlad. Everybody.
Yeah, man, let's do the DJ Vlad. It's just the dance you do surrounded by pictures of Rick Ross as the CEO. Woo! And Rose continued roasting Vlad on wax on his track Tears of Joy on the 2010 album Teflon Don, where he dropped lyrics saying, "A punch in the face get you 300K, ask Vlad, now he back to making minimum wage, another victim of my criminal ways." Ha! Criminal ways. Anything to get people to stop calling you Officer Ricky, really, isn't it? Frankly, Ross was very lucky to have gotten away with this without much worse than paying 300K. And it's one of the very few criminal incidents that he can even be associated. Hell, he's lucky that he didn't get criminally prosecuted for this crime or he'd have had to lock himself up. Well, guess I'm not going to the Ozone Awards this year. Bye.
Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget, I just dropped my limited edition Vamp Law Spooktober merch. There's only going to be 150 of these tees being sold, so make sure you go over to traplaw.com or hit that link below and get yours before they're gone. Thank you, and peace out.